Good evening and welcome to the July 15th work session for the 2025-2026 budget workshop. Chad, would you lead us in prayer, please?
I will, if you'll join me in prayer. Heavenly Father, we come to you this day, Lord, grateful for all the many blessings you bestow upon this city and our staff and our residents, council each day, Lord. I thank you for the opportunity to have free will and to govern, Lord. I ask that you be in our midst today and guide us to make decisions that would be honoring and glorifying to you, Lord. And I ask that you grant us the wisdom to make decisions that are good and just, Lord, and that we would think of all involved and not ourselves, and just work for the good of all the residents of this city. In Christ's name, amen.
Amen. If you'll stand for the pledges, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible. Okay, as I said earlier, this is a budget workshop. I will turn this over to our finance director, Todd Semino.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm Todd Semino, the interim finance director. This is the first budget workshop of the year. Before we get into the presentation, I just want to quickly thank all of the department directors and managers and staff that worked on the budget. Everyone met their deadlines this year. They were well prepared for their meetings. We asked them to give us everything that they need to run their departments, and they did so much, in fact, that we had to ask them to go back and maybe cut some of those needs. They're asking for too many. So they graciously did that because, as you know, we have to comply with the city charter where we have more operating revenues than operating expenditures. So we were able to accomplish that with this budget, or at least this draft of a proposed budget for your consideration. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So at the beginning of each year, the city manager basically updates our priorities and challenges for the city, and we try to incorporate his wishes into the budget to satisfy those requirements the best we can. And I'll ask the city manager to go ahead and walk through those for you now.
Thank you, Todd. You speak much more eloquently than me, so maybe you should just do it. As you know, this is kind of a going back through and restating really what our goals were last year, because we have the bond projects, we had a history of deferred maintenance, we also had retention and recruitment issues. So really not to restate all of them, it's to continue the retention, the benefits and the morale. I think we've moved that needle. We actually have fairly few open positions at the moment. PD has made great strides. Most of our other departments are close to full. I went ahead and left the second bullet because we're going to be working on these bond projects for several years. So that one's going to kind of stay on, so we stay on point, that we never let that kind of fall off, because we are in a different world, because we as an entity, it's been, well, maybe almost never done this many capital projects at one time. So we have to be on our A game to keep those projects on time and on budget. I've mentioned PD and fire. I think fire is completely full as well. PD, I believe, will be down to, after this last class, maybe 4. That being said, we do want to remain committed to the step plans that y'all approved last year. We can get into more details and some of the other challenges that we do have in the larger economic picture that is affecting us some. I've already touched on really making sure every dollar counts on both general fund and utility fund. And on the utility fund side, Todd's going to touch on some of the areas where we at least have on the horizon. We may have to do some additional adjustments. As we said, we would revisit after the rate studies. And then we will be working closely with SFA once their numbers come out in terms of student growth and their building plans, how that might affect traffic, drainage, impervious cover, obviously the housing piece, and we'll talk a little bit about the housing issue in general. We are going to do a little bit deeper dive in that, and it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to subsidize anything. What it may mean is we're going to try to recruit, oh, there we go. So we're going to continue to pursue primary jobs, because that is what helps float all boats. The primary jobs, the commerce, the sales tax. The ad valorem tax, which we will get into, maybe towards the end of the summer or when we have some of those data points from SFA on their growth. And I don't just mean this year, I mean the next 5 years, 10 years. We will probably do some gap analysis, looking at our existing housing stock, looking at what would really be student housing, looking at areas where we have true gaps, and then where we project needs looking forward. The downtown implementation plan is well underway, almost complete. On that front, we actually have an EDA grant opportunity we're about to submit for. We're already in discussions with the team as well as our federal partners. Leveraging and utilizing city assets. I know we will be talking about the Type B corporation later, but we do have, I don't want to call them orphans, but we have several assets, be they buildings, be they raw property that we're either maintaining or mowing, that could be on the tax rolls, that might not be highest and best use for us, that might be one way of reducing some operating costs long-term, and also leveraging them to put more things in the tax rolls, and again, bring more jobs, more commerce. And then at the end of the day, and Todd put that caveat there because Todd is the finance guy, is we have to maintain a minimum amount of reserves. So as we look at this, the goal is to be truly economically, financially, functionally sustainable today and tomorrow. We don't hide any footballs. We are going to talk about forecasting. However, with some of the larger issues in the national and world economy, we're also cognizant that when we do have dips in revenue, we don't want to take anything for granted. And there's been several recent articles that several other cities in Texas, some of which have historically always had surpluses, are now projecting deficits or subsequent year deficits, or will be digging into their actual reserves for operating cost. You don't want to do that too often. It can be kind of a rainy day fund if you get a dip, but you can only do it once or twice, and then you're running the risk of going below. You really should hit it for one-time capital items and have a plan long-term to keep adding to those reserves and replenishing them. With that, I yield.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Okay, so I'll begin the financial presentation of the budget at this time. Feel free, council, to stop me at any time to ask questions along this presentation. Don't mind it being a conversation rather than me just hollering numbers to you. Before I go over the general fund, which is the main operating fund of the city, I want to talk about two of the major sources of revenue for the general fund. The first slide here is over sales tax. Sales tax is 27% of the general fund's revenue. And what I wanted to illustrate here, obviously, is the declining growth rate of our sales tax revenue. So in FY 22 to 23, we had a year-over-year increase of sales tax revenue of 4.1%. The next year, the growth rate was 1.3%. The current year that we're in right now, comparing FY 24 to 25, we actually have a decline in sales tax revenue, but that's basically due to this month right here, February, which is basically our December sales, so that's the Christmas sales tax. It's not that people didn't buy their kids' Christmas presents this year. The state comptroller's office did an audit adjustment in the amount of $256,000. So basically, my experience has told me that when the Texas comptroller has a major adjustment like this, that means somebody reported, and it could be as far back as 3 years in the past going forward, somebody reported sales tax in the wrong jurisdiction Obviously, in this case, it was reported for Nacogdoches when it should have been allocated somewhere else. So they took it back out of our allocation and refunded it to the city that it belonged in. Or it could have been a large company that reported taxable sales that weren't taxable. So, like I said, that's a one-time audit adjustment. So if you take that audit adjustment back out, in other words, add that amount back in, then we have a growth rate of 0.8% for this year. But again, a declining growth rate in sales tax. So that's a challenge that we need to keep our eye on.
Todd, let me ask you a question real quick. Okay, sales tax is 27% of our revenue. That's based on the 1 cent that we collect, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, before I talk about property taxes, because that's our number one source of revenue, which is 35% of the revenue of the general fund, I wanted to give you an update on the general obligation bonds that the voters of Nacogdoches approved. As you know, last May, we issued the first tranche, and it was about $15 million. Staff is ready for the second tranche of bond issues, so you can see here that we're looking to issue approximately $14 million of bonds, and that's for the propositions that you can see here. The only two propositions that we have not issued money for yet is the cemetery and sidewalks, and we'll probably do that in the third tranche, which might be in another year from now. But to give you a timeline, we've already started the process in the background. We're going to have a conference call with Standard & Poor's, that's our rating agency, on August 5th. And then on August 19th, we're going to come to the council during the regular meeting to approve a bond ordinance to issue that second tranche of funds, and hope to receive those funds by September 11th. So that brings us to the property taxes. As you can see, the chart here basically goes over the history of the assessed values and our property tax rates. The M&O section, this is really for the citizens listening. So our tax rate is composed of two parts. The M&O part goes to the general fund. That stands for maintenance and operations. So that part of the tax rate goes to fund the general fund, which is basically your police, fire, parks, recreation, libraries, etc. It has nothing to do with water and sewer. Water and sewer have their own fund, and they're not funded by property taxes. The INS, that's interest and sinking, that goes into a different fund also. That goes into the debt service fund. Council doesn't really have a lot of leverage on what this rate is. It's calculated by the state, and it's calculated to a rate that just basically pays off your debt service requirements each year. This is the part of the rate that council has control over. They can grow it 3.5% a year without voter approval. Anything over that requires voter approval. But you can see the history, even in the general fund, it's been decreasing over the last couple of years. In fact, in 2024, we passed a no new revenue rate on our property taxes, which meant we had the same property taxes revenue in 2024 as we did 2023.
Todd, that would probably be a good point too, to also point out that, so in the intervening years, if you actually, granted, having been another place where costs were rapidly escalating with construction, I mean, talking about doubling and tripling in some cases, capital projects, it was during the quote-unquote COVID years where you had high inflation, where your cost of doing business is actually going up typically for everything, that tax rate was being lowered. So just for context, because your cost of doing business, usually everything you buy, I don't care if it's a patrol vehicle, screws, weed eaters, anything, is usually, as you know, and I think that also probably is reflected in some of the sales tax decline, is getting more expensive.
So something I did not like to see this year is we received our preliminary values from the CAD on April 29th. It's relatively flat compared to last year. I'm hoping that changes, considering the growth that we've had in the years prior. So hopefully that number comes back substantially higher than what it is now. But based on a flat assessed value, in order to increase your revenues by 3.5%, which is what the state allows by law, you're going to have to increase your property tax rate to get that 3.5% growth of revenue. So again, I said this last year, calculating the tax rate is complicated. There's a worksheet that we put in the back of each budget. Citizens are encouraged to go look at it if you want to, but it's 10 pages of calculations. So it is complicated, but I can give you a rough idea of what I think is going to happen this year. So on the debt service side, you know we're going to issue about another $14 million of bonds. So that alone is going to increase your tax rate. Maybe going from 5.7 cents, it's probably going to have to increase 4.5 cents just for the issuance of the bonds. And that's if these values stay this flat. If they go up, and we won't know until July 25th when we get the certified rolls, if we get the certified rolls on time, if that value goes up, then that rate can go down a little. Wouldn't need to be 4.5 cents. It could be lower. On the M&O side, again, this is for the general fund. That's for police, fire, all those categories I mentioned earlier. To get 3.5% revenue growth rate on that for the general fund, then we need maybe $0.015. So again, it's an estimate. I'm thinking 6 cents total. Last year, the average homestead in the city of Nacogdoches was $165,000. So based on that property owner, if they faced a 6 cent tax increase, it would increase their property taxes $99 a year. Is there any questions on that? Okay, so now we can look at the general fund. This is just a summary of what the budget's going to look like. You can see we're proposing to have $32.4 million of revenue, operating revenue, $31.8 million of operating expenses, and that's going to create an operating income of $565,000. So that checks off the charter requirement where your operating revenues have to be more than your operating expenditures. Then we take into account our capital expenditures, which is also our CIP. So this is basically, you know, all the rolling stock, you know, police vehicles, things like that. Well, I'm sorry, that's in a different fund. But this is going to be all of any like other vehicles that aren't purchasing it through a different fund, tractors, lawnmowers, things like that, plus our CIP plan. So that brings you to an ending cash balance of $13.7 million. We have our reserve requirement, and then of 25% of annual operating expenditures. And so we have an excess of $5.7 million in our reserves at the end of 2026. And that's good. Also, I need to point out that in our operating expenditures that we're proposing right now, this has no salary increase for employees, and it only has one new full-time employee addition in code enforcement, but it does include step increases for police and fire. But again, that does not include any raises for employees.
So this is where that cost of doing business piece, and historically, now, we're not gonna bet on the come on this either. Yes, we know SFA is going to be the driver of the growth, but this also demonstrates, go back to the CAD values, if you would. So, not a lot actually was built in most of those years. I believe that there was a significant adjustment of a reassessment that may have occurred during that time period. I think we actually have a few more things just on North Street we can probably point to that are under construction right now. But if you look at that piece, that is also why we need in the minimal amount of incentives for jobs projects, for even retail or rehab projects, and probably as little as possible, if any, on residential. Because quite honestly, we need that growth to drive the ad valorem up, and we need to also capture the sales tax. So if we can't get people to the right cash registers too, with some of the analysis we'll probably be doing in the coming year, I think we also need to look at really where our leakage is and the type of things that if we were to get here, we can capture more of that sales tax here locally. I know as you probably see, yes, we have things missing like a movie theater and other things like that. They're a long time coming, or hopefully coming back at some point. But Todd, I believe you can probably speak to that. I'm assuming it was around 22, 23 that they had a significant reevaluation of the property. It wasn't that there was $500 million of stuff built, because there wasn't.
Right. Several years ago, the state comptroller mandated that the CADs actually appraise values at current market values. I'm sure you all know when you go pay your property taxes at the end of the year, at least several years ago, you were like happy when you saw your valuations like 3 or 4 years ago. You were like, oh, my house is definitely worth more than this. But when the state comptroller's office mandated that all the CADs strictly go to market value, and it was for school district funding, then every CAD in the state that 1 year, they started pulling comps from real estate agencies, which they weren't really doing in the past. So that's why there was that big jump a few years ago. Okay, so back on the general fund, again, council, you might ask later when this hits you, hey, we got $565,000 of operating income. Why are you not considering an increase for your employees? And the reason is that we basically had to pull, you remember the ARPA funds that we received? A little over $8 million. We didn't spend all that money as quickly as we thought, and it accrued a bunch of interest income. And those funds were kept in different accounts. Part of it was in the water and sewer fund, and part of it was in the special grants fund. Well, you can use that interest income for any purpose of the primary government. So I decided to transfer $500,000 of that interest income away from those funds into the general fund, basically to help balance it this year. So $500,000 of that is one-time money. You won't see it again next year. But we are, talking to the city manager today, we will look at maybe trying to do one-time. You want to?
So we'll come back to y'all. We have a historic amount to the positive in our healthcare side. So there's some things we might be able to do on the healthcare, on the dependent side, which would be good. We will also look at other one-time scenarios. And then, again, we probably don't have the perfect timing of tariffs and of world economy and of inflation all hitting at the same time. We do need to gently kickstart more of the development and the ad valorem side without giving away the farm to get it done, because we really need it to hit the CAD. Because one of our historic problems, having worked in high growth scenarios or fairly flat ones, both, or even ones during downturns, is we have not had much growth. And with that, that's always a negative when you're trying to get retailers, when you're trying to get restaurants, anything you can capture sales tax on, and it's the same thing when it comes to your housing stock piece. But as we go through this gap analysis in the coming months or the coming year, we need to use that to the best we can to get as many people here for no incentive at all. Because at the end of the day, without that growth, we can't keep up with the cost of doing business. And that we need to retain good staff that we have, and we have great staff. We have almost everything full, but I don't want to say the well has run out. But when you have flat ad valorem, so that's your property tax, and now negatively impact sales tax, short of a printing press, you don't have many options. So we have been running lean. You remember I said that we would run lean. I've done this before. We only had no FTEs or one FTE. And we do need to retain our staff and with the understanding that if they stick with us, we're going to get past this and we are going to benefit from the SFA growth. But we're going to have to be very deliberate and smart in doing it and not just go for whoever walks in that door promising us the next great deal for an incentive. I'm probably going to hold pat. I think we're going to need more Eaton-type deals, and everything else is going to have to come organically. I don't know how else to put it. Because if we don't, we won't be able to pay the bills long-term.
There we go. So I have one question. In my many years at government and at the university, and I know it's really hard to reassess, do we absolutely need everything we're already doing? Because I could see that $500,000 right there if we have a year where we reassess within each of the departments. Do we need every single thing within this, and is this the best place to then convert that also into maybe staff increases for where we do need them? I'm just asking that question. And I know that hasn't been done in 4 years, that every department keeps what they have. And we have not had a pretty severe look at.
Well, we're pretty lean. I'll just say this, we're pretty lean.
Right.
We don't have a lot of asks in this request that aren't needed. Yes, everyone looked at kind of what they really need, and truthfully what we need is more revenue for some of the things where individual department heads feel like we're not able to deliver the best quality service to our residents already. Code enforcement is one area we've been lacking. That's why we had that one FTE in there. I know we did big raises on the PD step plan last year. Mm-hmm. We're going to honor those and the fire side, but I don't think we have, and Todd, you can speak to this, and I've been in bigger cities, smaller cities. Cities have been hit with hurricanes, cities that had downturns, cities that had more growth than they could keep up with on parks and facilities. Yes, you can always find something to cut, but you're going to give something up, probably.
Right.
And several of our departments are kind of lean to start with.
We're going to cut our council budget.
Okay.
I promise you that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was thinking that, it's a good thing to reevaluate, even all the services. What services do we need and what services, because to not give any raises is also a real problem too, as I see it. So that's just my 2 cents.
Well, we have held off on capital purchases.
Right.
And we can talk more about some of the in subsequent meeting, even unless we want to touch on some of it now. Even on the one option on the capital purchase side is even looking at some lease purchase scenarios on vehicles rather than buy them and hold them for a decade. I've worked in both scenarios, and sometimes that's one way to approach it. You have other costs associated with that. We're actually going to be probably doing the biggest auction we've ever had, because we do have a collection of a lot of old Tahoes, among other things, old equipment.
Yeah.
And that's also why we're assessing, we have what was supposed to be the old RV park. We have that's the westward. We have the property behind the expo. Those are the type of things that we've looked at, even to see the type B Corp, to try to get back on the tax rolls. Mm-hmm. And try to build, again, lower the operating costs. We're even going to look at that at some of our own other buildings. Are we in the right buildings, the right pieces of property? Right. Can we become leaner and more effective and lower those operating costs? So we are doing that.
Well, I appreciate all those things. I really do. I appreciate looking at it. And I also I'm fascinated with the right cash register, where's the leakage? I mean, I really think you're asking really, really good questions. I'm just asking one other one, just to throw it out there.
Excuse me, one thing we could do is we could decide, do we want to finance a city or do we don't want to finance a hospital district? I can give you 3 examples, and I know this goes back to 1992, where 1 cent of our sales tax goes to a hospital district that is literally burning money in the middle of Mound Street, period, dot. We're subsidizing their water for them now because they won't pay their water bill. They have ad valorem taxes that are due, that are not paid. So our employees and everybody else has to suffer because of an incompetent hospital. I said this when I got elected. This is not sustainable. You have to have your revenue. If you don't have revenue, you can't pay your bills and you cannot feed your employees' families. Period. Dot. We have cut our expenses to the bone. We have scrimped, we've saved, we've now you want to do without services. I mean, we have to decide, what do you want to do? Do you want to run a city or do you want to run a hospital district? What do you want to do? I think that's the question that everybody in here needs to ask yourself.
Well, I think right now we need to run a city here.
Okay,
And
I
that's why
totally
we're
agree.
looking at this budget.
Yeah, I
So
totally
I'd like to
agree.
return to the budget. Thank you.
Now, can I finish, Kathleen? Oh, I'm sorry.
I thought you were finished. I'm
No,
sorry.
you dismissed me. Let me get finished, please.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I would never do that.
Okay. Todd, would you go back? You don't have to go back, but tell me, last year I asked you how much that 1 penny made a difference on our ad valorem tax. And I think last year it was 30 cents. Is that correct?
Can't remember the exact figure last year, but I know what it is this year.
Okay. All right. Well, what is it this year?
So just keep in mind, at the current assessed values from the CAD, every 1 cent of property tax brings in about $230,000 of revenue.
Right. Last year it was about 200,000, I think.
So our sales tax is around 8.7, 8.8 million. So if you divide that 8.8 million by 230,000, it gives you roughly 38 cents of a tax break if you were to get that whole penny back to the city.
So if what you projected based on this budget right here, with your bonds and everything, you're projecting a 58.85 cent tax rate. I know that's preliminary, but based
Right.
on this, okay? So if you had that 1 penny back, it would reduce that by 38 cents, right?
Correct.
Which your tax rate would be 20.85 cents per 100. Is that correct?
Those are estimates, but that's correct.
That's all you can go by now is estimates. Thank you. Thank you for letting me finish, Kathleen.
Okay, if we were to look forward 1 year, so obviously we're talking about the FY '26 budget, but if we were to look forward to FY '27, and I have some assumptions down here for revenue and expenses, assuming we maintain a 3.5% increase on property tax, hopefully sales tax will come back, assuming a 1.75% increase in sales tax, and then we know we're getting rate increases in our water and sewer fund of over 5% a year. So a 5% increase in our franchise transfer from utility and sanitation. I only use these 3 sources of revenues as assumptions because between these 3 alone, that's 82% of the revenue in the general fund. So with those assumptions, our revenue for FY '27 would be 32.6 million. And then our expenses would be 32.5 million, and that's using these assumptions: a 1.5% increase in payroll, 3.5% increase in operational cost, which is basically inflation. And then you have your CIP request, which are usually $1 million each year. Well, I'm sorry, your capital, which is usually $1 million each year, plus your CIP. So for FY '27, you would have an operating income of $96,000. So that meets your charter requirement. And you would have excess cash reserves in excess of your 25% requirement of $3 million. So you would meet your policy requirement there as well. But if I were to walk you forward one more year, using the same assumptions for your revenue, same assumptions for your expenses, except we were able to hypothetically afford a 2% increase in payroll in FY '28. You would produce revenue of $33.4 million, expenses of $33.3 million, operating income of $53,000. That meets charter requirement. But look what happened. You went over, you still have cash, but you're over your requirement. That means you can no longer fund your CIP plan or buy capital.
So what, this is why we have forecasting. We're trying to point out that with that revenue issue, you can't cash flow anything anymore on one-time stuff. Now, there was a bill that was introduced in this special session. We're going to discuss it more with the delegation that might further hamper it. You know, you already had the 3.5% tax cap, but it also effectively penalizes those that have no growth. And if you had no growth, then you're stuck with last year's budget. So eventually, by default, you are letting people, you actually are pulling back on services and letting people go. And to do raises, you're just doing furloughs. And I don't mean this in any, I know I was quoted, I think, saying, you know, for some cities, this could be lights out. I sent y'all one article, one of the fast growth cities of 100,000 in Hill Country is now staring down about an $80 million general fund deficit by 28, 27 maybe. I think El Paso now has 1,000 employees frozen positions and has a $50 million deficit. We're not in the worst shape because we actually have always operated lean. And that's one thing to remember. But there will become a point where you're back to not only a deferred maintenance model, I mean, not enforcing codes, not mowing, a whole lot of things. And yes, you can't just sell off parkland as an example. You have to maintain it. That's another problem because those questions have come up. If it's parkland, it's very difficult to untangle that. So that's also why we're doing the downtown plan. That's why the goal is to get everything back to its heyday, highest and best use. Whether it's North Street, whether it's downtown, whether it's University, whether it is the southeast and southwest wards, and the things we should incentivize we get to the residential land bank, will be some of that infill on some of those lots that otherwise wouldn't kickstart. But we have, in most cities, because of the economic conditions, because some of the constraints that the legislature has now created, all of these things are kind of a perfect and imperfect storm, and we're not trying to alarm you. We're trying to manage through this. But yes, if 2 or 3 more things were to hit by the legislature, yes, it'll be lights out for other cities, and then we would be going through a very slow decline. We'd still be able to maintain some function. We won't be in the same hole as others, but we also would not be able to fix a lot of things or replace a lot of things until either the climate became different at the legislature to the point that there's some realization of unintended consequences and the benefit of the SFA growth. Make it clear we need to maximize our largest employer to the city's benefit, because the city, of course, was here 200 years before. And if we want to be here 200 years after, or even all the way through with them, we need to make sure that partnership yields what it should for the residents of the city and the county.
Todd, how many employees do we have?
I believe it's 320.
Yeah, we're up 3.25 roughly.
320, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, you know, talking about revenue, it's not just sales tax that has been given away since 1992. It's other things too that we have cut revenue on. For example, homestead exemptions. That has had a dramatic effect on your revenue.
Well, and especially the freeze that was granted to seniors.
Right.
That's coming at a cost of $300,000 a year
Right.
of lost revenue.
So with that, I've mentioned Eaton, I've mentioned the jobs piece. And when we had the last S&P rating call, was that Moody's or S&P? It was S&P.
S&P.
And that was for the utility bonds that we recently went through that process. The one thing that really came out of that, and it does affect our bond rating and our interest rate, is if you look at our average household incomes and our flat growth, flat population growth, and average household income of around 40. We are not going to get there. We already have twice as many, roughly, subsidized housing projects as most cities in the state this size. Our average household income's in the 40s. We have had some crime issues with one or two specifically that we're working with the community and council members, PD, and faith-based leaders to try to address, and the owners of those. But the bottom line is, we need to float all boats. And to do that, we've got to get the primary, this is not a gentrification scenario. This is floating all boats scenario for our retailers, for our commercial businesses, for our suppliers, for the Lowe's out there, for the Walmart. We're gonna have to focus on more Eaton-type jobs, which will also help in attracting some of the other residential projects, because when you're doing site analysis, be it for residential or for commercial, where you can end up with, let's just say, let's take the HEB. If you want to end up with a food desert, if you pop low on all of those metrics, they will not come. We have to float all boats at all income levels, and to do that, we're going to have to bring some higher paying jobs into the region and infuse that not only into the property tax side, but the sales tax side. It's supply and demand, and we need to maximize the opportunity with SFA to do that, which historically, and we went through this in the bond rating call, has been flat up until now. So this is the one opportunity. All I can just say, let's not mess it up. I'd say this is probably your one opportunity since the founding of SFA. So 100 years later, this is our chance, and we can't make any bad deals, make any bad decisions in the meantime over the next, I'd say, 5 years.
So are we at a hard stop at 5? Is that right on this? I can't. At 5:15? We are. Okay. I have a couple questions, but I'll save them because I don't want to. Or should I? I'm wondering if if there's any way to maximize the new golf course coming in, if there are things we can do in the city. And I'm also, sometime I'd like to have a conversation about the threats, the legislative threats, because I know we dodged, I can't even remember, I can't even think about how many bullets I was watching in the legislative session that we dodged this year, but I would like to have a more proactive.
Well, we have a meeting this week.
Okay.
Already set with the representative's office.
Okay.
Jerry reached out to our lobbyists as well today. We're going back through what we think the priorities are and how real some of them are. However, again, this last session the special, and the next session, if this keeps up,
Right, right.
it's going to be very difficult for, I mean, God forbid I have to go back to the Austin area and talk to the legislature, but it's going to be very difficult to, for most cities, because a lot of cities actually had much more debt, higher operating costs, and they have now flatlined. Now, if they've pulled bonds and it was based on continuous growth, then they do have a problem in their projections to be able to repay those.
So I'd prefer not to just rely on our lobbyist, but.
No,
to-
we're taking the lead.
Okay,
I
and then
can assure
also,
you of that.
and then also if you would like us to help energize our constituents, we would be delighted to do that.
Okay, move on to the utility fund. Council, as you know, last year we hired a consultant to perform a 5-year look-forward rate study to cover the cost. And council's already approved that rate plan for the next 5 years of increasing water and sewer rates by 5.41% per year. So for this year, coming up in FY '26, that's gonna be another $2.54 on the average residential water and sewer bill, where they consume 4,000 gallons of water. The rate increase is built into the revenue, so we're looking at $23 million of operating revenue. We're looking at $15.8 million of operating expenditures. Again, this includes no raises for employees, no new full-time equivalents either. And then we're looking at debt service payments of $4.5 million. It's gonna bring our operating income to $2.6 million, which complies with charter. And we have excess cash reserves over our 25% requirement of almost $5 million, so that complies with policy. Again, that study was very detailed. We really don't have a lot of concerns with the utility fund, so if there's no questions, I'll just move to the next. Sanitation fund. This year, we hired a consultant to do the same rate study, looking forward 5 years, projecting our expenses, projecting our CIP needs, and they came out with a rate analysis for the next 5 years, which council has not adopted yet. We'll need to adopt that before the end of this fiscal year, if you're in agreement with it, and I believe they suggested a 4% increase on residential trash collection, which is going to equate to 99 cents additional per month. And then for the commercial business, they proposed a 9% increase on basically dumpster roll-off. So those revenues were built in to the slides here. We're looking at $8.7 million of operating revenue, $6.6 million of operating expenditures. Again, no new full-time equivalents, no raises. That gives operating income of $2.1 million, complies with charter. Excess cash of $2.7 million, complies with policy. Those are pretty straightforward funds. They're self-sufficient. Again, for the general fund, we already included that in the summary you saw earlier, adding 1 code enforcement officer at an all-in cost of approximately $60,000. The next 12 or so slides are our CIP plan. This is basically just a legend you'll want to keep an eye on. If you see something that's green, it's a new item in the CIP plan. If it's red, we're removing it. And if it's shaded that kind of green, whatever color you want to call it, we're saying it's going to be completed by the end of this year. So we'll look at the general fund first. This is basically the facilities part. CIP, you only see 2 projects there. This green one is a contingency. We have, I believe, ARPA money set aside for that, and we moved that project to a different fund. You probably won't see this on the final version of the budget. We just wanted to keep it in there because it was presented last year. But really just 2 projects in play. We're pushing everything else out because of our cash situation that we've already told you about.
So go back to that real quick, Todd. So the reason being, of course, with that revenue and that spend rate, the reason we've had to push some of those other, which would arguably be very justifiable projects, long time coming, it is a larger cash flow. We're not talking about nickel and dime stuff here and there in one department. It's not going to add up. Let's just take the animal services renovation. Let's use that. That would wipe out more than what we have in the reserves in FY '27, right? Or 26. So that alone would take us down to the 25% with no increase in construction costs.
And all of these are pushed out because at least the history here has been to cash fund these projects. Council could always move these forward, but you would have to issue bonds for them, and there's already a lot of pressure on your tax rate. So we didn't figure you would want to consider that. That's why we're pushing them out until we have time to evaluate how we're going to move forward. Staying in the general fund, now we're looking at our parks projects. You'll see a lot more activity here. It's for lesser dollars. We've got some new projects down here. We're taking that one out. I believe it's because we're not going to get that grant. Still in the general fund, downtown projects, street projects, proposing new drainage projects. These are all pushed out later down the road. Hopefully we can get funding for these. If not, we'll have to reconsider those. Of course, that's up to council and management. I'm not saying that for me, but you can see the projects that we have slated for 26 and then 27. Again, everything 28 out. We just got to workshop those again later. The bond fund, you're all familiar with.
So, the annual storm drainage, sometimes I wonder if we don't spend the money, if then we spend more in repairs when there's a problem. Has that been happening, or we're okay? It's just a general question.
I don't know if I'd even want almost to have Case or Mike speak to that, simply because I think we have enough of the need that, and we also don't have a drainage fund.
Yeah, right.
So you have drainage impact fees in some places, which
Yeah.
is, we don't have any impact fees. So
Right.
there's your incentive for developers, is we don't have impact fees. We don't have roadway impact fees.
Right.
We don't have utility impact fees. So, Case, did you want to
There he is.
Aggie this?
Thanks, Case.
Okay, Case,
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Case, before you start, I would like to point out there is drainage money set aside in the bond,
Uh-huh.
Right.
and then also ARPA funds.
Right. So basically, we would cover some of the drain. That
So-
makes good sense to me.
Yes, ma'am. We're getting close to the end of our ARPA funding on the drainage side. We spent a lot of that money already, as you know.
Yeah.
We do have the bond money, which we are under design with currently, and that's the list of projects that we've, kind of mentioned before.
Yeah.
The impetus for the new section of the CIP for drainage projects is essentially, we don't have money beyond
Yeah.
the bond or the ARPA.
Right.
We do have, the community project funds that we've applied for. We don't have an answer on that right now.
Right.
Hopefully by the end of the summer, fall, maybe
Which-
September
which-
timeframe.
Yeah, but we do have at least, Representative Sessions has $3 million in for that, which would
Okay, good,
be a
good.
huge shot in the arm.
It'll help a lot. This was more trying to get a constant revenue source for doing projects, beyond what we have funding for currently. So, I was back at the back. I might have missed part of your question.
No, I think it totally answers my question. And we have plenty on our plates right now, too, so it makes good sense.
We're doing what we could do
Drops
with
it.
what we got.
I know. We really all appreciate that. I know we do up here, but I know every single person out there also appreciates that you are doing that. Thank you.
We're happy
And thanks, Case. Appreciate it.
So again, this part of the CIP is basically from the propositions that were passed nothing new. This is, again, continuing on with the bonds, Proposition E, parks, street improvements, and then sidewalks, which will come later. The airport construction fund, the only thing I really want to point out in here is there's a lot of new projects. We're good through 2026 next year, but all of these projects, if they're going to stay in here, the airport construction fund doesn't have the money for these, so it would be placed on the general fund to help fund these projects if there's no grants and things that are
So-
associated with
So
this.
the approach would likely be pursue them with grants. You mentioned how can we capture the big dollars with the golf course, and I'll always say this, I don't golf. So, that being said, the airport layout plan, the most recent one, and Larissa could speak to this, does include, I believe, a restaurant and hotel pad sites, a rental car agency site. So all of those things, because, and also strengthening the runway, because at the end of the day, if you can't land Gulfstreams, you can't capture those dollars. Because yes, we do want them to come to our airport. I'm not saying we'll swipe their credit card or anything else, but we need to get them to come to town and spend money because they have disposable income.
And also, we really put that airport money in the bond. So are we talking about drawing down bond dollars as long as they're matched? I mean, that was our
I mean,
requirement.
correct.
So for
The
these-
intent is to go after as much as we can through grants, which may take a while.
Yeah, what's here is in addition to the bonds.
Yeah, that's in addition to the bonds. But it would likely be grants, just like the additional drainage that's a federal earmark if we get that 3 million. In this case, our hope would be that TxDOT would partner with us with as much of it as they can, knowing that the volumes are gonna be there and it's gonna be a good investment in terms of the state.
And we've already submitted some preliminary items to TxDOT for grants and already had communications with some philanthropic grant givers. So I anticipate, the council put a 50% match requirement on use of any of the bond funds. I'm hoping that we could get much more than a 50% match.
And even these, I think we were very open. There wasn't any specific project that was funded, like, for example, in some of the others, like drainage and in particular areas. But this was very open as long as it was matched, so.
Okay. Hotel fund CIP, I think we might be able to remove this HVAC, so probably just a continuation of the Zion Hill, which has been in here for a while.
Well,
Special-
I think that was that may be the CVB building proper,
Right.
which just, I think, is being repaired right now.
Right. Again, we have a special grant fund, so these are the projects that are being handled in here. This one is new, so we had some money in our capital projects fund that wasn't being used. I don't know if, Mike, if you want to talk about this, but we're transferring money from that fund into here for, it looks like this sidewalk program. I think Mike's coming up, he can explain that to you a lot better than me.
Nice little short mic here. I'll just lean forward. So this one, Mike New, Executive Director of Development and Infrastructure. This is one that I kind of took on when I first got here. It's taken a little while to get rolling because the revolving loan fund, that's RLF, these dollars that we're currently holding, this was a transition from an old Texas Department of Agriculture Economic Development Fund. The city for many years had taken advantage of, and I'd say maybe about 10 years ago or close to it, the state decided that they were going to rework those funds and sort of go a different direction. Well, the city was still holding dollars. Rather than write a check back to the state, the city negotiated to convert those to CDBG funds, And probably since about 2017, we've been working this angle and that angle to try and identify the right projects to meet CDBG obligations in order to utilize these funds strategically. Right now, we've kind of narrowed them down to projects that have been submitted. We've made attempts to submit them previously. Sidewalk project along MLK, a sidewalk project, now I've lost it, but a couple of sidewalk projects and then a restroom project. One of the things we're trying to manage at this point is TDA has come back to us and said, well, you need to have an outside grant administrator to facilitate these. That is the standard they prefer. We will have to solicit a grant administrator. That will come back to council. We'll try to get that in the next month or so to get this project moving and start actually utilizing these funds for what they were intended for. But the history of this goes back quite a ways, even though it looks new on our CIP.
Okay, street maintenance fund. As you know, we get roughly $750,000 a year in street maintenance fees, so that's what this is about. It was suspended this year and next year because all the bond money that we have. So we're basically stockpiling that cash, and that's why there's a large amount in 2027. Then it goes back to the $750 each year. This is the utility fund. These are the start of the water projects, this entire page, all water projects. The second page is all water projects. Again, these are green, so that means they're new. I don't know if y'all had time to look at this over the weekend. If you have questions or not, I'm gonna move on unless you don't.
Todd, only you look at this kind of stuff on a weekend, right?
Yeah. These are the beginning of the wastewater projects. So you can see the items slated for next year. Again, a continuation of the wastewater projects. A lot of new projects come online again next year.
And Todd, I did have one thing. So I wanted to kind of call attention to just one thing, and there's a lot we could discuss here, but in our planning process, as we started brainstorming ways to leverage funds in ways that are compatible with how we need to manage them in these projects. Airport fire protection expansion was one that we thought would qualify for utility fund use. That was something that was sort of part of the airport construction fund, something that we discussed would be eligible here to move under utilities, and we could fund through our utilities. There's probably some other things that we can leverage and legitimately use utility funds if available for. So some of these projects is us trying to move things forward in a strategic way and find solutions rather than just pushing them out years. So even though we've done that a lot with our general fund CIP projects, we're trying to be strategic with some of these other ones and how we migrate them and get them moving forward rather than just pushing them out.
Last of the CIPs, the sanitation fund. You can see a lot of activity next year. It's all new landfill associated or new sale. And then what's next? So July 25th, hopefully we'll get the certified tax rolls from the CAD. Then we do some calculating, they do some calculating, and then on August 7th is when we'll receive our no new rate and voter approval tax rates. Both of these are statute dates, so hopefully they meet their state statute of July 25th. We'll meet our state statute of August 7th. Whenever we receive these rates, we're required to inform the council. This is not a council date, so we'll probably just email you those rates so you have them handy. August 19th will be our next budget workshop. We'll plan on having an actual draft of the entire budget cover to cover, and that's when council's going to be asked to basically not approve a tax rate, but to vote on a maximum proposed tax rate so we can start filing our notices in the newspaper, meet all of our notice requirements. And I can tell you right now, we're going to ask for the maximum rate, which is the voter approval rate. That's going to be the rate that gives us 3.5% of growth of revenue. Even though that's what we're going to ask you to vote on, you can later approve a rate up to that or anything less. But you can't go over what rate we propose for y'all. And then September 2nd, we're going to have our hearings on the budget. And by law, you can take action on the budget. We're going to suggest that you postpone approving the budget until you have your rate hearings on your tax rate. So September 2nd, we'll have the hearings. You'll postpone action on the budget. September 16th, we're going to establish the property tax rate and approve the budget. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Todd. Any other questions?
I just wanted to say, this is really impressive work with what you've had to deal with, and I appreciate all the straight answers and all the discussion. I don't know, it's definitely worth more cookies. But thank you, really, really, and I know the department heads and all the people who have put work into it, and especially when you sent it back and say, I'm sorry, but you're gonna have to cut back.
Yeah, I really didn't elaborate about that, but there was a lot of requests for capital equipment, a lot of requests for new personnel,
Right,
even operating costs. We were
Sure.
asked, we went back and said, you're even gonna have to cut some of your operating costs. So
Right,
we
right.
have to live in the confines of the charter, and so they all did it, and they did it willingly.
right.
And I was just gonna say, so remember, yes, we have, that's why I said we're already kind of running lean. Several areas need more people. We're not adding them because we don't think it'd be prudent. We know other places had been adding them, even though they were seeing the same indicators, or probably still adding them. And so we've got to worry about us in the larger context of the world. The upside is, we know there's growth coming with SFA. We know we have capital improvements that are underway that the city's doing, that TxDOT's working on. We'll have at least much smoother North Street, probably much faster, unfortunately, coming soon, before summer's over. And we see it, yes, as a potentially a period we're going to have some austerity, but we want everybody to stick with us, both in the community and staff, because we're going to come out on the other side of this. But we do need to be able to capture all of those opportunities, and it would really help if the legislature kind of helps us do that, or at least doesn't hinder us doing that. And I'll stop there.
Yeah. Todd, don't forget to, on our budget item. Got it. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, that concludes the budget workshop. We'll reconvene again in regular session at 5:30. Thank you very much.